time trying to get to sleep and not getting to sleep, whatever.
Yeah.
To redo that, redo my schedule yet again. Cold weather makes that. Oh, Tay.
Yeah.
1st of December. It's weekly Marx. We do weekly Marx at 3 o'clock on Eastern Time, Saturdays and Sundays. Later on today, we're not going to have Star Trek. It's just unfortunate, but Professor John is indisposed, and I'm loath to show anything in its place. The last time I did it, I showed Galaxy Quest because I felt that that was sort of the or Star Trek. But anyway, um, weekly marks. Uh, there is a, new translation of Karl Marx's Capital Volume One. It would be nice to have volume two and three, but that's probably asking for too much. And most of the emphasis has generally been on volume one of Capital. It has so many pages and is sort of, as I've said, front loaded by Marx and Engels that people don't get around to volumes two and three. But as I think our attention to volume two, the lecture series by the CSSGJ, lectures with Andrew Higginbottom, there, uh, volume two is important, and it's two and three, need to be there as long as you're doing volume one. So even though there's no new translation for volume two and three, one has to sort of appreciate that the work will probably be done. There are some other secondary literatures that I think are important. So even though we're plowing through a variety of things, including the new Princeton version of Capital, we need to pay attention to the other things as well. What I've introduced today is a little thing by Soviet Stern, who I suppose is a bit of a tanky, but on the other hand, he does pretty good reading schedule for all three volumes. And he posted something, I guess, today or yesterday on LVMH, which is Moet Hennessy and Louis Vuitton, uh, the big conglomerate, which apparently has a private equity thing attached to it. And of course, it includes all kinds of other brands, right? And this chart here, which Soviet Stern was good enough to include, shows you how many different brands are under the same grouping. These are fashion brands, mainly luxury brands, upscale stuff, and it is amazing how um, it's kind of an oligopoly in that sense. It does all kinds of upscale stuff that you would not normally think of as being all interconnected in the European context. No, I brought that in today just simply because there is a labor struggle that's going on. Workers at Hennessy Cognac Works have gone on strike, protesting the tariff war that, and also there's dumping that's going on. A whole variety of things related to the EU, electric vehicles. Um, the desire for Hennessy, for example, to either make their brandy in China or ship, massive barrels of the stuff and bottle it in China, which, is a sort of standard practice. But obviously, it's about pricing as well. And the tariff that looks to be added in the EU's context is 30 to 39% on things like Hennessy cognac. So, or and also competing things in terms of exchange. So people are ratcheting up their little tariff wars and not realizing, of course, or regular people, people who actually understand what's going on, are going to see their prices of things rise. And as I suggested, the cost of a margarita is going to go up. Anyway, this is from Soviet Stern's couple of postings today. Plenty means of luxury production to be seized and socialized and reallocated on the way to the communists to each according to their needs. He's joking, of course, that we in fact would appropriate all of these luxury goods. I think his point was to show that it's worth a lot and it's certainly a reasonable target and symptomatic, late capitalism. It's the first LVMH became the first European corporation to surpass a valuation of 500 billion. And they control about 60 subsidiaries that manage 75 luxury brands and have nearly 250,000 employees. And of course, they're in Paris. The production lines of such a conglomerate for all those fancy sprites, cosmetics, fashion being just as blood-soaked as those for their jewelry representing the creamiest, shiniest, upside facades of all the colonialist, neo-colonialist, extractivist, imperialist capitalism. Well, yeah, that's what it is. Marx talks a bit about luxury production as Department 2B, as in boy, of social production under capitalism in the analysis of turnover and reproduction of aggregate social capital. We actually have been looking at that, Capital Volume 2, Chapter 17 and Chapter 20, providing a general outline for circulative peculiarities of this department. And so we've been talking about, how there's multiple circuits, and you could say that luxury capital exists in a kind of circuit as well. Uh, it's problematic in the sense that tariffs on luxury goods uh, while serious, art actually don't affect a lot of people. It's not like you're going to go out and buy a Mercedes Benz every other day or whatever. And it has a lot more to do with patterns of credit and debit and currency exchange and a variety of other trade things that keep capitalism going. So, in light of that, we're still talking about value, and I wanted to introduce a couple of things from the new Princeton translation. The point I want to make with this is that we've already gone through chapter one. We've read it all the way through the new translation, and I showed last week that you can compare the prior English translation with the new translation and see that there are some differences that can be important. But the reality, of course, is that the notes are actually more important. They're either endnotes or footnotes, and there are a lot of them. And you cannot read Marx without going through these notes because they are the editor's remarks on these, and they're quite relevant and interestingly constructed. And I'm not going to read them all, of course, there are far too many, but I wanted to give you some examples that are kind of in tune with what we've been looking at recently. So this is from page 17 of the Princeton edition. In and for itself, a greater quantity of use value amounts to greater material wealth. That is, two coats amount to more than one. Two coats can clothe two people, one coat, just one person. This is Marx talking, right? Yet, and he's trying to be pretty, mundane on the one hand about it. Yet, when the quantity of material wealth increases, this can correspond to a simultaneous drop in its value. This opposing movement arises from the double character of labor. Productive power is, of course, always the productive power of useful concrete labor, and it determines only how much a purposeful, productive activity can achieve in a given amount of time. That is, Useful labor makes more or fewer products in direct proportion to how much its productive power increases or decreases. But variations in productive power no effect at all on the labor represented in value, on that labor in and for itself. Since productive power only has to do with the concrete useful form of labor, it naturally ceases to have any bearing on labor the moment labor's concrete useful form is abstracted away. Let me stop there for a moment and remind you that we're looking at a certain path of argument in volume one that shows the difference between concrete and abstract things. And it doesn't change the world as it is. It just provides a better framework in which to see how it's sort of constructed or constituted. The same labor, back to the text, the same labor of the same duration will always yield the same amount of value, regardless of whether its productive power varies. Within a given amount of time, however, labor will create different amounts of use values, more when its productive power increases, fewer when it. The same change in productive power that increases the fruitfulness of labor, and therefore the number of use values created, will reduce the overall magnitude of value belonging to the larger final quantity if it shortens the total amount of labor time needed to produce that quantity and vice versa. On the one hand, all labor is human labor power expended physiologically. It is in this capacity as equal human labor or abstract human labor that labor creates commodity value. Remember that this is how the argument is built from the front in terms of using commodity as a way of defining the kind of abstract set of relations that exists that connects labor, different kinds of labor. It has a footnote of in Roman numerals 27. On the other hand, all labor is human labor power expended in a particular form that is determined by a goal. It is in this capacity or as concrete useful labor that labor produces use values. Now, I know that, it may seem a little silly or crazy or whatever, but call that there is a difference between use value and exchange value. What Marx brings to this is to show the power, the extensive, the nature of scale and scope of labor as applied in an abstract way as capitalism grows. Um, and the next notation, which is 28, Roman numeral 28, comes in the next section, the immediately following section, number 3, chapter 1, um, the value form or exchange value. Commodities come into the world in the form of use values or physical commodity bodies, such as iron, linen, wheat, and so on. That is their homespun natural form. They are commodities only as a double entity, at once a use object and a bearer of value. Thus, they appear as commodities or have the form of commodities only insofar as they have a double form, that is, a natural and a value form. And that's the notation. We'll go through the entire notation. It goes on fairly long for number 28. We'll do number 22 and number 27 and number 28 right after we finish reading this very short section. The value objecthood of commodities differs from mistress quickly in that one knows not where to have it. Not even an atom of natural material goes into their value objecthood, in striking contrast to their objecthood as physical commodity bodies, which is a crude thing for the senses. However, one might twist and turn an individual commodity as a value thing, it remains ungraspable. But we need to remind ourselves that commodities possess value objecthood only insofar as they're expressions of the same social denominator, human labor, and that their value objecthood is thus purely social. This point should make the following one clear. The value objecthood of commodities can appear only in the social relation between commodity and commodity. In fact, we begin with exchange value or the exchange relation of commodities in order to pick up the trail of their value hidden within it. We must now turn back to exchange value, that form of appearance of value. Now, everybody knows, even if they know nothing else, that commodities have a common value form that contrasts in the most dramatic way with the diverse natural forms of their use values, that is, the money form. But here I want to do something bourgeois political economists have never even attempted, that is, lay bare its genesis, or in other words, trace the development of the value expression contained in the value relation of commodities, starting with the most inconspicuous form and proceeding all the way to the dazzling money form. With that, the whole enigma of money will also be solved. The simplest value relation is obviously one commodity's value relation with a single commodity of a different kind, any different kind. The value relation of two commodities provides us then with the simplest expression of commodity value. So the important point here is that there's a logic at work. We're comparing or connecting two forms, as it were, to commodities, and that they have connect ways in which they can be connected that are on the one hand abstract, but they always are determined in a very material way. They have material determinations, and we'll get back to that in a moment. And so our little equation expression in the regular text of volume 1 and page 17, a simpler individual value form, X commodity A equals Y commodity B, or X commodity A is worth Y commodity B. And, we're following through on the little notion of 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or that 20 yards of linen is worth one coat. And he obviously builds from that, and we've looked at that before. Now, what I want to do here is introduce several notations from the text itself. And these are just the notes that the editors and translators are yakking about. Number 3, I wanted to introduce this one 3 before we get to 27, because maybe on Monday we might look at um, uh, 29, note 29 and note 30. They're not as long, but the notes in general are fairly extensive, and they do explain the editor's point of view in a much a deeper sort of way, in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get from listening to an interview with the authors, that is, with the translator and editor, the two Pauls. The terms abstract and concrete, as Marx uses them, had undergone a change of meaning in Hegel's writing. The terms entered philosophical discourse in the medieval philosophy of Boethius, for whom, in translating Aristotle, abstracta named things that are drawn away from their material bearers, whereas concreta named things enmeshed with material. So you already have this differentiation, a kind of binary between abstract and concrete. Now, Hegel's understanding of abstract contains the sense of moving away from something, but what is moved away from is not material, but determination. So what we're looking at is a process of some kind, um, not necessarily objects, but the relationship between or among objects. A determination is simply a trait that makes something itself. A physical object is spatial and temporal and extended. That is, it has presence in that sense. These are its determinations. So it's 3 kinds of determinations: spatial, temporal, extended. Abstract applies to things when they have few determinations. For example, being is abstract, the ontological sense of being, identity, blah, 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 insofar as it has not yet received all the determinations that would make up a real worldly thing. You can see this when you compare being to an apple. One has form and purpose, the other might, but you can't really readily tell. In contrast, an American high school teacher is concrete because they have a whole set of determinations that distinguish them from all other things, a national allegiance, an occupation, a set of skills, and inner and outer distinctions. Now, Marx, by and large, adopts Hegel's understanding of abstract and concrete, where abstract means moving away from determinations, empty, ahistorical, and ignoring real distinctions, and concrete means the contrary of these things, highly determinate, really existing, historical, full, and fully developed. Abstract things, like value, have determinations. They just don't have enough to make them societally useful on their own. Thus, value has to be embodied in things. So, what we're talking here is to follow on the dialectic. He didn't mention dialectic here, but this is how the logic works. As you only know this because of the interaction of the abstract and the concrete. Concrete doesn't just simply exist. In the human context, you're always bringing something to it, whatever it is. And so the determination, you bring a determination to the thing that comes into your field of vision, your field of view, the center of your foreground. So note 27. So I've gone from note 3 and skipped all those other notes to note 27, Roman numeral 27. We're still in chapter 1. So in its capacity, well, actually, we're not in chapter 1. What we're looking at above, note number 3 was from the 1867, the preface to the 1867 version edition, which is the one that the translators used. It's the second German edition. Sorry. This next one is from a different section, but it is numbered Roman numeral 27. It's not in the same preface. So, in its capacity as abstract human labor, labor creates, bildet, that is bildet in German, create. Labor creates commodity value. Den Warenwert, while in its capacity as concrete useful labor, it produce here, use value. As concrete useful labor, it produces use value. Bildet, a form of the verb bilden, has a bilden, has a wide range of meanings, that is, shape, form, cultivate, make up, constitute, create, develop. Hence, Bildungsroman. A Bildungsroman is it's like a young Werther. It's stories about coming to adulthood or coming to it's quasi heroic. It is usually the growth of youth, post puberty or whatever. Well, that's maybe being too specific. Marx uses it to say that abstract human labor is what creates or constitutes or forms the the substance of value. It is important to recognize that abstract, not concrete labor alone creates value. And so a quasi-Ricardian labor theory of value in which particular labor goes into a use value and makes its value is not what Marx means here. This might be somewhat confusing since earlier in the chapter, Marx calls useful labor die Bildnerin, or creator of use values, thereby establishing an association among uh, the Bilden word family, that is, labor and the creation values in general. We should note, however, that Marx is not completely consistent with his terminology regarding the creation of values. Sometimes speaks of the production of values. Oh, yeah, this is still the 1867 preface because I go to a different section below. Now, note Roman numeral 28. This is much longer. Value is a teletechnology. This word is interesting because it's a neologism at one level, but is certainly modern in its imposition here. Is a teletechnology that allows one thing to be exchanged for a qualitatively different thing at a distance of time and space without significant loss. So it's talking kind of about extension, as we're talking about above. In the capital project, value is the main object of study. Although a technology, it isn't purely or even primarily physical, even if it often counts on physical bearers like commodities or coins or concrete labor. Value is as much an idea as a thing, as much a phantasm in the mind as a practical commitment by everyone involved, as much a general feature of the system as an individual quasi-immaterial substance actually existing and realized in a purchase, sale, or trade. So when I buy something, I obtain the thing, and I also obtain mysteriously its value, a hypothesized quote, amount of a common something that exists in two different things. See, this is that, kind of movement between things, which adheres to my purchase in a ghostly fashion and is ready later to leap over. If I sell it to another item, I get in return. So this is that point that is being made about exchange that Heinrich makes. Mosley makes it too, is this idea that it always is a kind of activity. It always is sort of mobilized in that sense. It's always in motion. And it is abstract, but it also has it has concrete implications, if nothing else. And it always is established because a human is engaging in this procedure. So, although words relating to value have existed since European antiquity, value or Wert changes its meaning radically in the capital system. In Aristotle's philosophy, value was a share in justice. That is, a share in justice. For actors in the marketplace, just meant having an equal amount before and after a transaction. This is from the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle. Value meant you got what you pay for. In other words, in the ancient Stoic school, individual good things, which always fell short of the universal and impossible idea of the good, quote unquote, were to be judged according to their relative worthiness of being pursued for a good life. This is the discussion of what counts as having, building a good life, et cetera, et cetera. These are, ethical conditions in that particular sense. Now, it's just not necessarily about the ethics. It is about the logical construction of the ethics, which is actually more important. You prefer this thing over that thing because it is worth it for the good life you want. Nowhere previously, however, did value make up the specific kind of teletechnology it became under capital, a medium for communicating the homogenized, generalized, standardized labor involved in the production of a commodity to be realized in exchange. Marx considers this idea the most peculiar in the whole system and the most radical of his discoveries. Even though concrete work and material exchanges are necessary for this kind of economy, that is, set of exchanges to function, value is peculiar because through all the exchanges of raw materials into finished products and the exchanges of goods for other goods, value remains abstract, yet quasi-material, invisible yet present, and although transiting through multiple forms, remains somehow always the same thing and always the same amount of that thing when subject to certain laws. Value looks like the last metaphysical entity in the most practical material zone, that is, the economy. the last metaphysical entity in the most practical material zone. It is important to note the differences between value and wealth. Wealth is an accumulated stock of riches that allows a person to live comparatively better or to undertake comparatively bigger projects. A pauper's wealth buys bread. A king finances a war. You can think of wealth as an accumulated purchasing power. Value, on the other hand, is first of all a social form. It is the medium for human interaction under this system. Instead of meeting face to face, social actors meet at a distance through the medium of value. Laborers meet their bosses, sellers meet buyers, intermediate sellers meet intermediate sellers, and retailers meet consumers through the value that is exchanged, although they may never meet face to face. So there's mediation is going on here. Indeed, because of value and because value is the impersonal medium and the goal of the system, people do not meet even when they do meet. That's an interesting way to put that. People do not meet even when they do meet. The crucial part of their interaction is always the value that moves through it. Unless you think that that's unimportant, the entire um, there's sort of an economy of, without going into a whole lecture on it, but the economy of desire could be described that way. That all, certain, when you talk about fetishism, commodity fetishism or whatever, sometimes it's not about the object, it's about the meaning of the object, it's about the message or some other thing that the object contains. So, second of all, value is not a natural feature of the world or a fixture in economics, but a historical anomaly, marking a particular epoch. Other kinds of social arrangements did not, do not, and will not need value in this sense. It rankles Marx that classical political economists naturalize value and then conceive of political economy as the study of an external phenomenon, and their method as a positivism, that is, to tell how value is produced and subsequently to tell how to produce it better. Now, it's more than that. For Marx, value is a construct invented by the system and apotheosized by, you know, apotheosis is a certain set of transcendent sort of things that are created um, by economists. They name, naturalize, and prop up this feature of the system. Value is real, but only in the system. In fact, it is the system's linchpin, which is why the critique of political economy aims to expose value as historically limited and conceptually foggy, aiming to pull the linchpin. Third of all, value, which is made in this system, although it does not mean it is made up, is made out of peculiar ingredients. It's tempting to think of value as something physically injected into products by workers. Marx, it's like packaging or something. Marx does say that workers transfer the energy of their bodies and the skills of their know-how into products, but this is misleading. This is the congealment stuff. It is true that Marx wants to open up the hidden abode of production in order to put workers back at the source of value production. Yet it is not their concrete labor, what he calls the private activity of a worker on materials, whether it's in the workshop or in the factory. And it is also not the useful item that create value. One process, that is human work that works a material into a useful thing, transforms into another process, value creation. Capital does this. Goods get worked and value gets created at the same time. It is indisputable that value is created in part out of worked goods. How it is created out of concrete labor and its products requires a different explanation, however. Now, that may seem a little murky, this idea about transformation, but, these three ideas are kind of there, and you have to sort of work through that. And I assume that further down in the notes, this might actually get explained a little better. Through exchange on a big market, the labor market, labor becomes homogenized and abstracted, losing its particularity. It becomes a quantitatively measured expenditure of labor in general, measured by homogenized standard clock time. In this way, labor itself becomes treated as a commodity, as uniform, undifferentiated, comparable with all other labor on the market. You punch a clock. And like other commodities, it is thus exchangeable with all other kinds of labor on the market. And this makes a lot of assumptions, that we're all physically the same size and blah 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 blah. Exchange value is value's form of appearance, one of its forms, but what is exchanged in exchange under capital, just as ultimately what is produced in production, is ultimately the pseudo metaphysical thing value. So, we've already made this little move to something that is pseudo metaphysical, and that's problematic for all kinds of reasons. But, you want to sort of have to talk about it that way because it is not the same as the physicality, the material physicality. Further, value can stand on its own. It commandeers an already existing form, that is money, and bends that form to its own uses. Previously a means of exchange, a tool of account, or a medium for storing wealth, money now represents and actually embodies value. So you see a set of transformations that are kind of a logical extension. Recall the diagram that moves from commodity up through money commodity to money, et cetera, et cetera. So values being formed. And while it seems incredibly abstract, the fact that it is exchanged, the process of engaging it, helps this formation of value. This is one of the main innovations in Marx's analysis. Two terms, value form and form of appearance, change the way we see value. Now, first of all, value is historically contingent existence. It's only under capitalism that economic and social relations take the form of value. And secondly, value is polyform, that is, has many forms, and it mutates. The system's flexibility depends on this. Value takes the form of raw materials, a finished commodity, a thing for use, a thing for exchange, money, credit, and so on. It remains value through all its forms, which are thus forms of appearance of what functions as a stable substance. Although, as Marx argues, its substantiality is a feature of the system alone. So this is this special or exceptional or unique nature of capitalism that, in terms of formation of value, that makes it different than other, modes of production. In socialism, that's less, it's less important, because there's, in the perfect form in under communism, there's no money, don't need money. Or in feudalism, an early feudalism, let's say, or slavery, some of these things just don't exist. There's no particular market for some of these things, or they're poorly formed. Whereas in primitive communism, you have that is the very basic thing that goes before slavery and feudalism. People don't have any money either, or they have very primitive forms of it, or they just barter, or and you have smaller tribal family units, blah 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 blah, and that's a kind of privileging of primitive accumulation. Anyway, that's another story. Back to this, to Marx. Money and the value that appears in that form is a different perversion of individual and social life than that older Marxian keyword alienated labor was. When he wrote about alienation in 1843 to 44, he had not yet, this is the economic and philosophical manuscripts, he had not yet decided that the characteristic feature of capitalist sociality was abstraction from qualitative differences among kinds of labor and kinds of things in a homogenized pseudo soul of the world. He had not yet discovered the real figment, value substance, maybe because of the way it distorts human sociality. It's harder to see and harder to combat. Alienation gives way in the later critique of political economy to value forms and their intertransformations. So there's a lot there that needs to sort of be worked through. One further note, almost to the end, debates over the labor theory of value have been fashionable since soon after publication of the first edition of the book, and they continue today, but they're by and large disconnected from what Marx says about value. In the main, worries about the labor theory of value derive from prior commitment to another school of thought. Today, the mainstream understanding of value comes from marginalist theory, invented in several places at once during Marx's late years, although it is unclear whether he knew about the development at the time. You know, you can argue this one way or the other, and the math proves that actually. William Stanley Jevons, Leon Walras, Karl Menger, and later Alfred Marshall theorized value as a measure of the marginal utility of goods and psychological assessment by consumers. The entire, neoclassical model, the marginal utility, and the Marshallian analysis is that Walras and Marshall, are developed this. It's mathematical, but it kind of works if you assume, certain things don't exist in reality. And because the math works, it's easier to teach in that sense. As a reflex, because of the popularity of this school and its explanation of value, Marx's arguments were assimilated to those of David Ricardo and the Ricardians, when in truth, he departed from them starkly. Put briefly, Adam Smith thought value was equal to the cost of production, which added up to its natural price, quote unquote. Ricardo had a cost of production theory as well, but for him, the labor input was the dominant factor in those costs. When you're talking about the rent theory, blah, 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 that, he tries to make it as easy as possible. Rediscovery of Marx's own idea of value, that idiosyncratic social historical polyform abstraction, happened progressively in the century through a set of unorthodox readers, starting with Isaac Illich Rubin, II Rubin, of 1924, continuing in Hans-Georg Backhaus and the German Neue Mark lecture in the 19th. We're talking about the new lecture, new Marx lectures in the 1960s, which developed into quote unquote value form theory. This is what Heinrich is kind of moving forward, which was anticipated separately by the feminist economist Diane Elson in an influential article from 1979. Now, I use a different paragraph to, it's a little diversion, and it should have probably come earlier, but I didn't want to confuse you. But we're sort of at the end of the note, the kind of notes for today. But this note is actually important as well, and then we can end. Include a couple of other things. This is from the editor's introduction. This is note 21 from the editor's introduction, which is a different section. It precedes the section, the 1864 preface. Anyway, Marx distinguishes the economic thought of the period preceding and contemporaneous with him into classical political economy and vulgar or bourgeois economists. The latter, that is, vulgar or bourgeois economists, being those writers and policymakers who turn away from analyzing conditions and deriving laws and turn that into an apology for the greatness of the capital system. And that's what we have today. If you watch CNBC or Fox Business, that's kind of what you get. You get, vulgarity essentially. Jim Cramer is he's not an economist, but his discourse is a vulgar discourse, with all due respect. Vulgar economists cling to mere semblance, and classical political economy has come close to stumbling onto the true state of affairs. To Marx, the second is worthy of critique. The first, however, is only worthy of contempt. So he makes a very clear division between the vulgar and the classical. In the bourgeois economist, Marx spies a tendency to reify the system, to treat it as natural and permanent, taking its ability to satisfy human wants and needs as almost a divine occurrence. This is, free marketeers talk like this. Some libertarians talk like this. In contrast, Marx sees the system as historical, having a beginning and an end, as not just an imperfect satisfier of wants and needs, but more, as a producer of abuse, dissatisfaction, disease, and death. The bourgeois economists foreshadowed the marginalists, the neoclassicals, who exploded onto the scene in Marx's final years. He seems to have been ignorant of the work of Walter Stanley Jevons in England, Karl Menger in Austria, and Marie Esprit Léon Valrat in France. So that's sort of the last paragraph of what we're going to read today. I've included an article on the transformation problem, which is a little more further along, but I included a video on the basics of the transformation problem, which is a value related thing. And I included a video from a couple days ago on the issues of what we had begun this little yammering with about uh, uh, French cognac and the placing of 39% Chinese tariffs. And of course, you know who has to pay for it. And so there's a little thing here on that has just happened yet, whatever, yesterday, a couple days ago. French cognac maker Hennessy has suspended a plan to bottle its brandy in China to avoid import tariffs. Staff management on Tuesday after hundreds of workers went on strike last week to protest the move. Hennessy, because it would have an effect on wages, obviously. Hennessy, owned by luxury group LVMH, opens, and you have a new tab that's linked here, had said it was exploring options to deal with anti-dumping measures imposed by Beijing last month, including shipping cognac to China for bottling to circumvent tariffs. And lest you think that's unimportant, there's that stuff, that kind of thing is going to happen in the U.S. as well during this little tariff malarkey. So I think I've completed all the yammering I want to make. Um, uh, I've used up my obligated time. Are there any questions or issues or brickbats or
Yeah,
anything?
question on
Sure.
that last bit about Jevons, Menger, and I can't remember the other person.
There's Marshall and Valra.
So are
W
those
A.
people,
Yes.
those were bourgeois economists, or were those people that were sort of more aligned in taking his idea further?
They're marginalists, let's put it that way. They're the support for, and they're bourgeois in that sense, yes. Vulgar
Okay.
economists don't even get to be bourgeois.
Okay.
Well, because they don't recognize sort of the class, the being bushy, the bushiness of their activity. Um, it's mathematical, it works. It's just not classical. It's neoclassical in the sense that it picks a narrow, specific, but fairly logical model of how to calculate stuff like utility and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
so
they understand the limitations, whereas the vulgar economist doesn't give a crap. It's just that's just the way it is. Whereas
uh,
neoclassical economists actually, and it's been proved by people like Samuelson, et cetera, that post Keynesian or heterodox economics has certain viability, particularly on certain issues of inequality, et cetera.
hmm. Yeah, well, so this is kind of new to me, it seems. I'd sort of thought of, Marx and then these, opposing economists as not even, engaged in sort of a back and forth about this, but this seems to indicate that there was, there were.
Well, there would have been had Marx read a little Jevons and Valra because they're contemporaries. But for some reason, this is that the counterfactual that if Marx had had a faculty position, he probably would have dealt with these guys.
Okay,
Um,
yeah,
but rather he was, a pamphleteer dealing with, workers.
yeah. Yeah. Wow, so
We're,
this it's
but
making a better picture of what value, this labor theory of value. But
yeah.
it because it's this abstraction, it's kind of ethereal, It takes like I don't know, all this like supporting context to make it make more sense, I guess.
Well, you have to begin to identify the elements of it. This is that it's called an identification problem in statistics. But you have to figure out what's going on, and it sounds mystical, right? But
Yeah.
what it what it's talking about is the exchanges, the interaction, the relations, you know, uh, it's why some Marxists went on to game theory. Some analytic Marxists decided that, okay, well, this is at one level you can actually describe the set of interactions, but you can't limit it to that, but rather it is a feature of it. That is, there is a social structure of accumulation that accumulation can only come from a system of exchanges.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
Oh man.
it seems a little tautological, but it's not. You actually have to say, well, you can't. It's not like Ayn Rand, that assumes nobody exchanges, or you exchange by force or something. Rather, people have a contract. They have a social contract that people kind of are used to doing this stuff, and
Wow.
it's measurable, but that it's not natural in that sense. It is, it has a peculiarity that comes because people, are motivated in a variety of ways. And, as we've discovered with the last election, people are motivated, admire greedy people or something.
Yeah. Right. They've been given license, right?
Yeah. Well, Trump just named his Tiffany's father-in-law Tiffany Trump's father-in-law to a position in the White House.
Wow.
So he gave, Kushner an ambassadorship to France, and he just, it's a family business, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy is sort of qualified. I mean, he's a law degree and he's a business guy and blah blah blah, and he's the, uh, uh, what is he? I think he's Lebanese. I have no idea. He is Middle Eastern in background, and so he's the advisor for Middle Eastern affair, or senior advisor for Middle Eastern whatever. So he's the guy who's going to get all the blame when Trump decides to round up, you know, Muslims.
Well, yeah, I guess he's got to round up the Mexicans first, right?
Oh yeah. Well, there's more of them. Whatever.
Yeah. Right.
No, seriously speaking, I mean, when you look at the numbers, there are as many Arab Americans as there are trans people in the U.S. population.
A very small number, huh?
A tremendously small number. It's only Islamophobia that makes you think they're everywhere, and they aren't.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I always that's the same thing with the homeless thing. It's like,
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
well,
No, no, it is it's statistically, you can look at it in social science or whatever. It's like a third person effect or whatever the hell they call it. Um, you always assume there's more stuff there, and it's not always more stuff there. It might
right.
actually be a very small amount.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm convinced that's the case with these right wingers. They keep talking about how tough they are, but I think the actual tough guys there are a pretty small number.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Well, and firearms are a great equalizer, with all due respect.
Yeah, right.
And nothing more scary than, uh, morbidly obese people carrying firearms.
Yeah,
Uh, anyway.
pretty good.
Oh, well, I've yammered far too much here. I better, before I get into stupid territory. Stupid territory.
I'll I'll
Joe,
I'll I'll, I'll drag you down there.
Joe, if you're still there, no, he